So stay tuned. Taped with Rabbi Doug is next.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight.
But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is Dr. Irving Cutler. And welcome, Dr. Cutler, to the show. I am glad to have you with us today. Dr. Cutler is well known in the Jewish community, especially because he is the expert on the old Chicago Jewish community, the new Chicago Jewish community, and the changes in Chicago's Jewish community within the city of Chicago. Dr. Irving Cutler served as a U.S. naval officer in World War II, went on to receive a master's degree in social science at the University of Chicago and a PhD in geography at Northwestern University. He served on the faculty of Chicago State University for 24 years, 10 years as chairman of the geography department. He's been a consultant to a number of government agencies and is author of 8 books, including the award-winning Chicago Metropolis of the Mid-Continent, now in its 4th edition, and award-winning The Jews of Chicago from Shtetl to Suburb, and also Jewish Chicago, a Pictorial History. His most recent book, just released last year, Chicago's Jewish West Side, as well. Dr. Cutler has participated in a number of radio and television programs and has given many tours and talks on the various aspects of Chicago, including Jewish Chicago. He has also been the curator of 2 major Jewish exhibits in the city and is a founding member of the Chicago Jewish Historical Society and is on its board of directors. He's also served as president of the Geographic Society of Chicago. And Dr. Cutler, first of all, I want you to know I have wanted to have you on my show for years, and I finally am able to have you, and it's really a great honor and pleasure. I want to show the book that, made you famous to me, and this is the book right here. It's called The Jews of Chicago, From Shtetl to Suburb. And this book right here, as you can see, just goes through the changes in the Jewish community from old to new, picture after picture, story after story. What made you, first of all, decide to do a historical overview of the changes in Jewish Chicago?
Well, I felt that it was such a great community. Actually, Chicago at one time was the 3rd largest Jewish community in the world. Only New York and Warsaw, Poland, had more people. And there hadn't been anything written in the way of the history of the community since the 1920s.
Do you know who wrote back in the 1920s about it? Who was the person?
God, I'm trying to think of his name.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just curious because I never heard that before.
Yeah, he's in the bibliography there.
Uh-huh.
So I decided to do it. It was sort of a takeoff from a book I did on Chicago as a whole.
And that's this book right here, correct? Let me pull this out and show it to our audience.
Right.
This is Chicago Metropolis of the Mid-Continent that we talked about. This is the 4th edition of the book. And you can see here the beautiful picture of the lakefront and downtown, and by Irving Cutler. So this was your first book, right?
Yes.
And so many pictures of Chicago, groundbreaking changes in the city, and tell me about Chicago's Jewish community. Now, we had the West Side and the South Side were really the hearts of the Chicago Jewish community back in the day. Isn't that correct?
In the early days, the South Side Jewish community was more important than now it's the North Side.
Sure.
And in between you had the West Side, which was the largest of all Jewish communities.
Now, what would you say is the reason that people moved and other people moved in. Obviously, the neighborhoods changed. What caused people to move away from those solid communities? The west side of Chicago, we still drive through the west side of Chicago today and see the synagogue buildings that are still standing, which are magnificent synagogues like you've never seen before and won't see again in Chicago. Why is it that those communities all changed? Was it the affluence of the Jewish community moving to suburban Chicago, or there was more apartment living there and people bought houses? What really caused it?
Incidentally, I remember the name of the one who wrote the Midas. It was Midas, yeah. Well, in case of the west side, generally the greater Lawndale area, partly it was a movement to move upward a little bit to areas with more amenities, perhaps better schools. But in Lawndale, it was part of a trend not only of the Jews but of a lot of Chicagoans. After World War II, they wanted a home of their own. And they were helped by the government. The GI Bill gave low interest rates to the veterans. And Lawndale had very, very few single-family homes. It was 2 flats, 3 flats, apartment buildings. And so they started moving out of Lawndale, and they moved in various directions. A few moved to small number to the South Shore. Quite a few, most of them, moved north into Albany Park, West Rogers Park, and they kept moving into Skokie and Lincolnwood, and they're still moving further north and northwest especially.
Now, you have pictures throughout. It's just amazing. I love this picture. I want to just show this one picture right away. On page 69 in the Jews of Chicago, this picture with the matzah being packed here. Yeah. Tell me, how do you get a picture like that and the origin of such a picture from this book?
Well, somebody told me that the daughter of the owner, that was the Wittenberg Matzo Factory, that she lived in Chicago. So I looked her up and we talked, and I went to her apartment. She was an elderly woman. She has passed away now, and she gave me that picture. And she had worked in the Matzo Factory when it was on Maxwell Street.
It's just amazing as I go through it. I mean, we could talk about every picture. What happened to the Yiddish newspapers and the Yiddish language in Chicago? Because it was very prevalent on the west side and on the south side. And I see here the Chicago American. Here it is in Yiddish.
Yeah.
And what happened to these Yiddish papers and the Yiddish language in Chicago? It was so prevalent. We had Yiddish schools, even in West Rogers Park, back in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
The Workman's Circle was in West Rogers Park, now where the Chicago Community College stands.
Yeah.
Across from the Arc on California Avenue in Arthur. What happened to it, and what happened to that culture?
Well, the Jewish newspapers, at one time there were 5 Yiddish newspapers. There were 3 Orthodox ones, the Courier, the Tug, and the Morgen Journal, and there were 2 non-religious, really. The Forward, which was sort of a socialist working person paper, and then there was a communist paper, the Freiheit. So you had these 5, but they're all gone now out of Chicago. The Courier, which was one of the big ones, closed in the late 40s, and the Forward, I think, closed in the 50s.
Unbelievable. You got interior pictures, too. Here's an interior picture on page 33 of Sinai Temple.
Yeah.
So beautiful. It was, and that was on the south side Sinai, right?
Yeah, that picture, 21st and Michigan, and right near McCormick Place. And the interior, one of the reasons it's so nice, it was done by Louis Sullivan, the famous architect.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! You have another picture I want to show and ask about. Destroyed by the Chicago fire, the ruins of Simon and Strauss store on Lake Street. From the Chicago fire. How did you obtain a picture of this, and how did you get it verified what it was?
Well, I think I got the picture, if I'm not mistaken, from the Chicago Historical Society.
Uh-huh.
And
Page 30, beautiful.
you know,
You came up just recently with this book that was released, and it says Images of America. Is this a series by other authors also?
right. It's the company is Arcadia Publishing, and they come up with historic little books about all the cities, neighborhoods. In Chicago, there must be 20 or 25 books, including on Wrigley Field, O'Hare, and all the different neighborhoods.
And they approached you and said, could you give us a book on Chicago's Jewish West Side?
Right. They had one on the Germans, the Italians, the Swedes, and so on.
And so here's a wonderful Anshe Knesset Israel synagogue on page 42 of this book. And right underneath it is the first Romanian congregation, Sharei Shomayim,
Yeah.
Sharei Shomayim, the gates of heaven, both in Chicago. The Sharei Shomayim was on Douglas Boulevard, as was the Anshe Knesset Israel, which the building still stands today, Anshe Knesset Israel.
Yeah, both of them still
But
stand.
they both still stand
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
They both still stand today.
This one, Anshe Knesset Israel, was the largest on the west side. It had about 3,500 seats, and it had 35 Torahs.
35 Torahs.
And they used to keep it open almost around the clock. You can go in there at midnight and you'd find some elderly Jewish men, often with long beards, studying the Talmud. And for the high holidays especially, they brought some of the best cantors from Europe or from New York, Pinchik, Kutzavitsky, the Blinderchazen. And the remaining one, the other one, has an interesting history. In 1926, the Queen of Romania visited Chicago, and she attended services at that shul of her
Romanian
former
synagogue.
members, and they treated her royally. They had a red carpet all the way out to the street, although they had fled her country because it was so anti-Semitic.
How
But they treated
interesting.
her like a queen.
How interesting. And here, right next to it on page 43, the former Anshe Shalom congregation at Polk Street in Independence. And that, by the way, is still standing also.
Right, it's
And-
Seventh-day Adventist now.
And Temple Judea from the south, that was 1227 South Independence also. That building also is still standing.
Right.
It's hard to see, though, when you drive by it now because there's a lot of things around it.
Right.
But if you can see through there, you can still see those menorahs on top of the
Right,
building
right.
today, both
And,
on the west side.
That was the one Reform congregation in the entire
West side
Lawndale area. And when the Orthodox Jews, who made up the largest part of the population, when they'd pass it, they were very suspicious of a synagogue where the men and women sat together, where you can go in without a yarmulke, or you could drive up on Saturday. So they often turned their heads and closed their eyes and whispered it must be supported by Christian missionaries. But it was, in a way, it was very progressive. It had a very good youth group. And one interesting sidebar on it, I give tours of Chicago and Jewish Chicago in particular, and I once passed it, and we had a rabbi on board, and he saw those menorahs, and he got all excited, and he wanted to buy them. So he went into and talked to the minister, but the minister wouldn't sell them.
I don't blame them. I don't blame them. It's part of the history of their building, I guess.
Right.
Two pictures that I love in this book that are close to my heart, Chicago's Jewish West Side, is this picture of Jimmy Durante.
Oh, okay.
And it's at Theodore Herzl Junior College, which still stands there, Theodore Herzl on the west side. For Arthur Schimmel, Arthur Elrod, Judge Abraham Lincoln Merovitz, Richard J. Daley, Jimmy Durante, and Alderman Jacob Arvey and Sidney Deutsch. Now, Jacob Arvey, I knew very, very well because his grandson is one of my very, very close friends, Steve Arvey, who sings our theme song on the opening to show. Talking about Rabbi Doug. And that's Steve Arvey, that's Jacob Arvey's grandson. I just love this picture.
Yeah.
And if you could go to camera one there and get a look at this, it's quite a picture of them together. group, and how
Yeah.
amazing. Jimmy Durante in Chicago with all these Jews.
Yeah, the others were powerful politicians of Chicago and especially of the 24th Ward. And on the Sunday before every major election, on the following Tuesday, they'd have a rally in the Herzl School auditorium to try to, get the people excited and get out to vote. And so to attract the people, they'd bring in a celebrity. This year they had Jimmy Durante. Another year, I remember, they had the singer Martha Ray.
Very nice. And I'm going to just move up here because here is Harry S. Truman and Jacob Arvey together as well on the same page. What amazing pictures to get a hold of and talk about, because this is the history of Jewish Chicago. Just amazing. Now, just recently, I understand this came about. This book is another one in the Images of America, Jewish Chicago, a Pictorial History. You take the pictures with, Maxwell Street, the history of Maxwell Street. What happened to Maxwell Street? Now, for those who don't know Maxwell Street was the outdoor market of the Jewish community and Chicago. It was definitely famous and well known, and eventually the people who peddled and sold there, it dwindled down, and then it started to get popular again, and then they closed it. And they sold it, I guess, to the University of Illinois, Chicago Circle campus to Chicago, right. University of Illinois, Chicago. And they moved the market to another, it's not the same though, to another area. Why did Maxwell Street change when it was just the landmark market probably in the United States like that?
Yeah, at one time it actually was the third busiest retail area in the city. Only downtown and the Englewood Shopping Center at 63rd and Halsted did more business. Partly Mayor Daley wanted land for the expansion of the university, and partly Mayor Daley didn't like areas that weren't as clean as possible, that were generally sort of poor, shabby areas. And so they closed the market in the 1990s, and now they have a Sunday-only market on Desplaines Street. And whereas the old market, you heard Yiddish spoken all over, now you hear mainly Spanish spoken.
Very interesting. What is your favorite thing about Jewish Chicago? I mean, what in your tours, and you're going around, what really hits your heart the most that you'd like to show off and bring everyone to?
Well,
because it's your passion, I know.
Yeah, I especially like to take people along Douglas Boulevard, where you had all these major Jewish institutions, not only a number of synagogues, we saw some of them, but you had the Yeshiva, the Hebrew Theological College, which turned out 500 or so Orthodox rabbis. You had the JPI, the Jewish People's Institute, which was probably the busiest JCC that Chicago ever had, because remember, in those days, most people didn't have automobiles, and they used the local facilities. I
want to tell you about the JPI, just my own personal experience. I don't know anything about the JPI. I was too young, or not even born when it was in its heyday, and I was certainly too young to know about it. But nowadays, I go around and do weddings of people. So I meet their parents, and I say, how did you two meet? And I can't tell you that probably half of the people whose weddings I do, their parents tell me, we met at a JPI dance.
Yeah, right.
At a JPI dance. More Jewish weddings and engagements took place at the JPI probably than any other place in Chicago for the Jewish community.
Right. I've met probably 25 or 30 couples. In the summer, every Sunday, they had a dance on the roof to a live band. And young Jewish people and not so young Jewish people, they'd come, and that's where they'd meet. I met a woman from Elgin a number of years ago, and she's an elderly woman now, and she said when she was a young lady, she and her girlfriend used to take the electric train in from Elgin to Chicago to attend the Roof Garden Dance Sunday nights at the JPI. And she said she came, and she danced until she finally caught one up there.
We have a number of Jewish Chicagoans who are famous and were famous and still are well known. Studs Terkel, Ann Landers, Irv Cupsonett. You have Saul Bellow. You have all their pictures in here. Barney Ross, the boxer.
Right.
You know, all these people were Chicagoans.
Yeah.
Who would you say is the premier Jewish Chicagoan that you were acquainted with or are acquainted with?
Well, that I knew of.
Yeah.
I would say probably two that I thought were outstanding. One was Julius Rosenwald, who was chairman of the board of Sears, but a great philanthropist.
And I think a number of rooms in the Field Museum are named after Julius Rosenwald.
Right.
And the first Reformed Jewish day school in the Midwest was the Rosenwald Jewish Day School, which no longer exists, unfortunately, because of funding problems, but named after him also.
Yeah, and the Museum of Science and Industry was founded by...
And it was founded by him.
Right.
I know, I see his name everywhere.
He was so modest, he didn't want it named after him, but he gave the money for it. So I think he was... and he helped, you know, all kinds of Jewish causes, the community centers and things like that, and gave lots of money. The other one, I would say Philip Klutznick, who helped develop communities around Chicago, but he was very active internationally in Jewish organizations, and he served in the president's cabinet, I think, a couple times. He helped build Park Forest, and he was head of the Jewish Federation and all kinds of local, national, and international organizations. And he just passed away a few years ago.
Really. In doing these books and putting them together, what do you think was the hardest thing for you to attain? I know pictures or stories that were accurate. What was the hardest part as a historian for you to, you know, come across and put in that you wanted to really include?
Well, there were certain pictures that I wanted because I felt they were important and to fill the gap. And sometimes you had to really look around, go to different museums, the Chicago History Museum, contact people, go to newspapers to try to, you know, get those photos.
Who was the most prominent rabbi in the history of Chicago, would you say? You certainly know and knew all of them. Who was the most prominent rabbi?
Well, I think historically it would probably be Rabbi Emil Hirsch.
And can you tell us who that was for those of us who don't know?
Yeah, he was a Reform rabbi. He was rabbi of Sinai for over 40 years, which is almost like a record for rabbis. But he was engaged in all kinds of activities. He served on all kinds of city commissions. As I understand it, he was the highest paid minister in the country at one time. That didn't make him, you know, especially good, but he was very well liked. He built up his synagogue. They built a beautiful building which had sort of a community center connected with it on the south side.
So here you have a whole thing on page 12 in the pictorial history of Rabbi Emil Hirsch here.
Yeah, and he was quite liberal in many ways. He helped settle one of the strikes of the garment workers, took the side of the workers, and convinced his members who owned some of the companies that they were striking against to make concessions to the strikers.
Very nice. Just this past week before we're taping, Rebbitzin Winchester, Charlotte Winchester, passed away. Rabbi Winchester was the rabbi of the Nusach HaRishon in Albany Park. He was considered to be, in my parents' days, one of the most prominent of the Orthodox rabbis
Right.
in Chicago, along with Rabbi Aaron Ryan, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik,
Yeah.
all these prominent Orthodox rabbis. If we go back to the West Side and the South Side in the heyday, the 30s, 40s, 20s, 30s, 40s,
Right.
who were the prominent Orthodox rabbis in those days?
Well,
Rabbi Goldman, I'm sure, because he lived to be
Right.
over 100
100,
until
right.
I was in my
Right.
20s, I think late 20s when he passed
well,
away.
I would say Rabbi Ephraim Epstein of the Rosh Hashanah, Anshe Knesset Israel. He was rabbi there for almost half a century.
Now, I believe that, didn't they now become Adas Yeshurun? I think the Rosh
Yeah, they're
Hashanah
on
is
Tui.
now where what used to be Temple Beth El in
Yeah.
Chicago.
Yeah, right.
Then became the Ort building, and now is Adas Yeshurun, Anshe
Right.
Knesset Israel, the Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah. Well, he was. He did a lot for Jewish education, and he helped bring over a lot of refugees during that Nazi period. The other one, who I think was a well-known Orthodox rabbi, was Sal Silver, who was the president of the yeshiva for many years, and he was also rabbi of Anshe Shalom for, I think, 36 years, and he was an active Zionist. There were many, prominent rabbis on the West Side, but those are two that come to mind, and they were both rabbis of some of the bigger shoals.
When you say that he was an active Zionist,
Yeah.
Today there are a number of people who aren't Zionists.
Right.
They're Jewish and supporters. It wasn't like that back then, was it? Wasn't really the whole of the Jewish community supporters of Israel back in the 40s when Israel became a state?
Well, at that time, but before that time, I understand some of the Reform Jews were not for Israel. They thought it would be sort of a conflict between the United States, between the American Jews and the Jews of Palestine or Israel. Now, during the war period, everybody was gung-ho for Israel.
Very nice.
And when Israel, was fighting the Arabs in 1948 in that period.
I want to show your books one more time. This is Irving Cutler's The Jews of Chicago, From Shtetl to Suburb, Jewish Chicago, A Pictorial History, your latest book. The Chicago Jewish West Side.
Yeah, that's the latest.
Oh, this is the latest. This is the
Yeah.
latest pictorials before that, right
Yeah.
before that. And then, of course, your original book, Chicago, Metropolis of the Mid-Continent. I can't thank you enough. We just had a Vorspeist, just a taste of Irving Cutler in Jewish Chicago. I'd love to have you back again sometime in the near future. I want to once again thank Dr. Irving Cutler for being with us. I want to remind you that you should check out our website at www.tvrabbi.com, where you can also watch our show on the web. Or if you want to get in touch with Dr. Cutler, know more about his books, please email us, info@tvrabbi.com, and I'll be sure to forward it on to him and get back to you. I want to thank you for being with us. I want to thank Dr. Cutler for being with us, and hope to see you next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, everyone.
And I'm talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug on your TV show. Well, he's the rabbi for me. Anytime you need. You're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.